Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar From Data to Decarbonization, how Vision Linens and Clean Linen are building a greener supply chain. So we know that tackling Scope 3 emissions is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity for almost every business aiming to net zero. So we can't do it alone. Think about it. Your supplier's emission are your Scope 3 emissions, and your emissions are your customers' Scope 3. This means that we are fundamentally linked. Trying to force a supplier's to hand over data is compliance, but working with a key partner to understand their challenges, co-develop meaningful reduction strategies, and share savings is true collaboration. So to dive into this real-world dynamic, I'm glad to be joined by two sustainability champions who are living this challenge and opportunity every day. First, let's welcome Rachel, Head of Sustainability of Vision Linens, which is a subsidiary of WestPoint Home. Rachel, welcome. Would you like to describe in a couple of sentences what Vision Linens is?
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. Vision Linens is a world-leading supplier of textiles, predominantly to the hospitality industry. So that's like bed, bath, kitchen, and table linen. We've got our own manufacturing bases in Bahrain and America, and we source internationally as well.
Great, thank you. And next, we have Chris Bell, Head of Safety, Sustainability, and Environment and Clean Linen. Chris, welcome to you too. Same question, if you can tell us what Clean Linen does.
Thank you. We are an industrial laundry. We focus on hospitality and industrial workwear, predominantly hotels, spas, but we do a lot in the food industry.
Great. Thank you. And finally, I'm Jada. I'm a climate expert at Greenly, and I've been working together with Rachel to measure WestPoint's carbon footprint. At Greenly, climate experts guide customers to collect relevant data to assess their company's GHG emissions, to align with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and LCA standards, advise on emission reduction strategies, and reporting frameworks. So today I will be guiding our conversation. Let's dive in. So this is our agenda for today. The main part of the webinar is the between discussion. We have several questions for our two guests. Then we will leave the last 5 to 10 minutes for a Q&A session, and then we will reach our conclusions. So let's begin by discussing the challenges of data collection for the supplier company, Vision Linens in this case. Rachel, how did you define Vision Linens' global carbon vision and identify Scope 3 as the biggest hurdle?
Yes, sure. So obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning, Vision is a subsidiary of WestPoint Home. So we are actually a global textiles manufacturer and supplier. So because we have such a global footprint, we've got manufacturing in the US and Bahrain. We've got offices across the US, UK, Europe, and in India, China, and Pakistan. So it was a very large global entity structure that we were having to think about around how we were going to do our data collection strategy. Thinking about some of the US reporting requirements, with this being a kind of listed, our company reports into a listed company as well. So there was a lot of regulatory considerations around the best approach to take. And we felt that actually looking at it on an entity level, so Vision obviously is one entity. We've got an entity for our factory in Bahrain. We've got entity in the US for the factory and the offices there. So we sort of looked at it from a financial structure model first and the kind of boundaries that we were drawing, which also then helped to think about the approaches that we would take to gather our Scope 3 data. Because obviously there's a lot of distinctions between activity and spend data. And again, each of those entities have their own financial accounting centres, different currencies between pound, dollar, and obviously Bahraini currency as well. So we felt like that was the best way to go, and we could drill down into the spend data within each entity. And again, some of that would vary. So if we're thinking about Scope 3 for a factory, obviously there's a lot more around our kind of purchase raw materials, and there's a lot richer data that we can get into that because we know those volumes, versus if we looked at a smaller proportion of spend in a category that we didn't have as richer activity data, it allowed us to sort of tailor the approach based on where the depth and the value was in expending time to get better quality data.
Perfect. Yeah. And then, as we mentioned, Vision Linen is one subsidiary of WestPoint Home, as you were also reminding. And you tackled carbon accounting and reporting from the group as well. So while you were collecting the data for all the different entities, how did you decide between going activity spend or spend-based data, and how did you coordinate the data collection process across the regions?
Yeah, exactly. So we sort of roughly know, obviously, where our categories of spend were in terms of the proportions of that. So then at that point, we could then actually identify where we had specific activity data. So an example being, when it comes to the amount of purchased goods that we're buying, there's data that breaks that down, for example, by some of the sort of the transportation, obviously the actual materials that we're procuring. So we can try and split out different categories of data there. The same with our vehicles, for example, our own kind of fleet and lease vehicles, we know what the kind of mileage is of those. So it gets into the nitty gritty of the quality of the data that you have and the amount of time and effort that you want to expend doing that. And again, the example being that if we think about raw materials and the inputs, so for example, there's a lot more detail that we can get around like machinery and equipment that we've purchased, obviously, that go into the factories, rather than obviously, the IT, for example, because we've got a cyber security ISO certification in one of the entities, they actually have got a specific list of all the IT equipment. So again, sometimes depending on what different drivers are within different departments, they've already got a lot of the work there to already have things detailed out. And then it was also categorizing some of those, deciding which categories were in scope. So for example, for us at the moment, end of life is still a massive area to get the data model and structure correct based on the lifespan of each different product category and how long that lasts in the market for. So there are some considerations about evolving our data collection strategy over time. So the different systems that we have in place. So we're investing in an ERP system, which will give us more granular data as well. So some of it is accepting that it's spend for now, but we can then move towards an activity level data by establishing which ones we want to kind of evolve that strategy for. And the only other point to mention as well, the benefit of the global strategy for our data collection with the entities is it allows us to look at the regional reduction strategies and the data at a regional level. So the reduction strategy for a factory would be very different to our reduction strategy for a sourcing officer. So the benefit of splitting the data out at that level allows us to see what meaningful actions we can take where the activity is happening, as opposed to just trying to amalgamate it all together and not getting a clearer picture as to where those changes are being most effective.
Great. Chris, I know you want to share something about end of
Yeah.
life. Go ahead.
And I think this is where collaboration up and down the supply chain comes in. So Rachel mentioned one of the challenges is full vision to understand the end of life aspect of their linen. Obviously, they produce that and they distribute it and then they send it to us. So we are collecting that end of life data. I appreciate we're only one small customer of Visions. We're actually being able to discuss that with Rachel and be able to analyse how we get into that calculation, sort of opens doors up and makes that process a lot easier.
Yeah,
great. And I think we have a question in the chat that we can actually tackle right now, Rachel.
Yes, how long it took. So we gave ourselves double the amount of work because we wanted to baseline from 2023 and do 2024. So it was twice the work that it would normally take. I'd say fundamentally, finance have a lot of this data. So obviously, your end of year accounting breaks down, obviously, the spend data. So then you can obviously review that with the teams and establish it. So the thing that takes the most time is looking at all the different categories and then establishing the who, what, when, where, how to get that data really and sort of mapping it. And then once you've contacted the right people, typically the data, because it was historical as well, it already existed. It's just a case of gathering it and then adding it into the system really. So it's more of a data governance and organization exercise to sort of do your stakeholder mapping. And I would say the larger the organization, the more complex it is. Obviously, I was coordinating across 3 different financial teams as well in each of those locations. So it's as long and complex as your organization.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So, okay. So how does collecting this data help to provide richer product level insight to your customers?
Yeah, so this is the bit that becomes really sort of exciting and interesting for us. So we've got two dimensions because we obviously have our own factory. So Bahrain being the example, we've got product that we supply to clean from there. That means we can give more detailed analysis with regards to obviously the impacts that we've got across that site, and then can start to leverage some of that data to get down to LCAs, which I know we'll kind of address later. The other benefit is through our supply chain and our partners. In particular, some of the benefits now we've started to leverage through the supplier scorecard feature, where we can invite suppliers to fill in an assessment. It also is allowing us to start to see which of our suppliers have already gone further with their greenhouse gas assessments and have included their scope 3. But again, similar to sort of laundry, the factories are very energy intensive, so they've always been measuring their energy utilization in terms of scope 1 and 2, but the complexity of that purchasing is where it's taken some of our supply partners longer to get the scope 3. So what that will allow us to do in time is also to start to do supplier specific emission factors for some of our more advanced partners, which again starts to help us to tell the story of which kind of suppliers for additional products are actively working on a decarbonisation strategy, so we can be more confident with proposing certain suppliers that are actively on that journey as well as then thinking about where those opportunities are in terms of the impacts of the different products that we're supplying as well.
Absolutely. So now I would like to hear Chris's perspective. So Chris, you have been in charge of collecting data for calculating Clean's carbon footprint. So how was collecting scope 1, 2, and 3 data across hotel and customer sites evolved? And what lessons did Clean Linen learn about working with a supplier to capture accurate data?
So I think we, as many people would be when you start this journey, a little bit lost, a little bit, where do we find this information? Is this information credible? So we were working very much in isolation as a business, and we were trying to come up with the best figures internally before sort of reaching out. But as Rachel has mentioned, scope 1 and 2 are relatively easy. I would say quite straightforward to identify and to track. You don't necessarily need a module like Greenly to do that. Obviously, it helps utilising Greenly because you ensure you get the right conversion factors in there. But scope 3 was a little bit more difficult, and it's evolved over time, facilitated by Greenly. So if we look at sort of 2024's greenhouse gas report, we identified around about 60 individual categories within scope 3. This year, we've almost doubled that. So we can see that the evolution of scopes is not finished. Now, I saw one question come up around about scope 4. I think scope 4 capture is going to be very much dictated by, have we fully identified all of the scope 3s? So the lessons we learned were really about, it's crucial to engage with suppliers. It's crucial to get the right information and ask the right questions to get the right information. Again, you need to identify with your scopes and with your greenhouse gas footprint, are you looking cradle to grave or are you looking cradle to gate? So you'll get two different figures when you look at that. Clean operates cradle to grave, so we look at everything that comes in, for example, from Rachel's factories, right the way through the distribution of them until they arrive at our factory, the processing of them on our factory, and the obviously associated carbon emissions from that. And then we look at how our customers use it and how our customers dispose of it. So when we talked earlier about understanding the end of life, we're not fully there yet. There's a lot more engagement to do with our customers to understand that. And I think that's going to increase the scope 3 potentially. But if I was to say the most important thing in ensuring you've got accurate data is by having face-to-face conversations with people up and down the supply chain, building relationships like myself and Rachel have got. There may be some things we've identified that we can share up the supply chain, down the supply chain, and vice versa. So I would look at this exercise as supplier, manufacturer, or in our case, launder, and then the end customer as one carbon footprint. And I think that's the best way to look at it. So accuracy of data, and just have an open mind when it comes to it, and ask them questions. What about this? What about that? What about the other? And I think that's what's generated double the amount of category scopes that we've got under scope 3.
That's great, absolutely. Rachel, I see you nodding. Would you like to add anything to what Chris just said?
Just enthusiastically nodding along, I think. I think for me, the one example I was thinking of there is at a high level, obviously we've done our greenhouse gas assessment, and that obviously gives, a supplier or customer, like Chris, an understanding of where we're at. But then there's still some examples of things like outside of the platform that we'd be actively reporting on, for example, which is the logistics footprint of the stock that we're delivering. And I think these are the examples of the more sort of day-to-day operational metrics that you might be able to kind of pull out on a kind of month-to-month basis versus obviously your overall footprint. And I think that's the conversation to, I think we've had a few good chats around what operational data and what are the opportunities to provide insights on a more sort of like, actually, what are the choices of how we're delivering stock to our customer, and highlighting opportunities for efficiencies for both companies. And I think that's the distinction between the benefits of an overall greenhouse gas report versus those more like day-to-day ongoing conversations. And I think that's the pitch really around sort of tactical quick wins, efficiencies versus the broader longer term trajectory of what are you doing to decarbonize as a business.
Absolutely. And I think also from what you say, these two sort of efforts can work at the same time, and also using the GHG assessment as an opportunity to open the doors for having this daily conversation and then further collaboration further down the chain. So that's really important. Great, thanks. So as also, Chris, as you were mentioning, and this is also the experience that we have in Greenly, most companies that work on their first carbon assessment, they realize that their scope 3 emissions often represent the largest part of their carbon footprint. So to better understand the origin of these emissions and eventually work to reduce them, it is crucial to analyze flagship products or services in the supply chain. So how does tracking the full product life cycle help you identify hotspots, improve reporting, and support sustainability decisions?
Again, the Greenly modules help immensely from a visual point of view to identify these hotspots. What I particularly like about the platform is how many different layers you can actually delve down into. So not only do we sort of look at very top line categories, but we can go right down into a particular product line, or we can go down into a particular supplier. And I think accuracy, as I've mentioned, accuracy of data is everything. And I'll come on to that a little bit later on one of the other sections that we've actually got. We're not all the way there yet. I mean, the next phase for us is to do the life cycle analysis, because again, we've identified the next phase. We are pretty confident that the data we are publishing now with the assistance of Greenly is accurate. It can be validated, it can be rubber stamped, but actually we need to have a look at that at the minute level of different processes, different products. So is there a variation in washing temperature? Is there variation in chemical dosing? Is there a variation in the packing configuration? So we're really getting into the realms of very specifics. So life cycle analysis does play a big part in that, and I think that sharpens the pencil, so to speak. But again, without accurate data that you can hang your hat on, we can't make the future sustainability decisions. I think the biggest thing for Clean is our strategy focuses on three things. One, it's got to be green, so it's got to tick the sustainability box. It's got to be green in the ambition with what we want to do. But the other two most important things are it's got to be financially sustainable for the business, and it's got to be financially or sustainable for our employees. And without them three ticks, then we are very reluctant to move forward with anything. And I think that the clarity of data that Greenly gives us allows us visually to make a very, very quick decision, and gives us a confidence to be able to pass that information on up and down the supply chain.
That's amazing. Rachel,
I think, because we've just started to do a life cycle analysis for one of the products that we supply to Clean, and I think again, it sort of helps you look at the nearer term, marginal gains and efficiencies around things like transportation and packaging. So, we can do more like compression and optimized packaging, which proportionately is a very small part of the product footprint. But then there's longer term investments around things like renewable energy, thinking about material selection and choices. Those are the much bigger ticket items, but require much more sort of systemic wide changes across a supply chain to sort of enable some of those changes, certainly when it comes to thinking about the impact of materials. So it starts to allow us to tell the story as well. So what Chris is saying around, well, these are the things we can do here that kind of, everyone's trying to sort of drive some efficiencies on the sort of, 1 to 5% scale versus those really big hitting, net zero goal reductions are actually where then it's like, well, the strategy to get to that is the fact, that we're investing in solar at Bahrain, and then we could evidence over time with that data, actually pre-investment, that was the kind of impact. Now we're getting to this. It's actually telling that story of sort of active decarbonisation as well. And then that's also a benefit to then, the point where we could then articulate that to clean, and they're also procuring a lower carbon product, which then also will reduce their scope 3 footprint based on the products that they're procuring.
That's great. And I enjoy actually how you are highlighting the fact that, we start from sort of a black box of trying to gather as much data as we have available. And then once you see the results, you are kind of incentivized and also interested in going deeper and try to be better at what you're already reporting. But then you want to go into the detail of the products or the services and chemicals and very small variables that affect your operation. That is really exciting.
And I think I've seen a few people in the poll have talked about the challenge of gathering data. And I think even us as from a factory level, we're trying to look at streamlining some examples where finance actually hold a huge amount of data. So actually then sometimes you've got operational teams that might feel like, what's the burden of reporting on them to provide the data. So we're already looking at efficiencies of where does the data live? How can we sort of extrapolate and drive insights around that data? At the point where, like for us as a facility, it's probably similar to clean, where you're kind of able to allocate certain proportions of materials to certain lines. So again, it's starting to have those active conversations with your stakeholders in the business to understand some of the current approaches to how are they measuring reporting, and quite often sometimes how closely operations and finance share their data sets. That's an example of kind of bringing a bit of a fuller picture to it.
That's great.
And I think one thing I would add, and I would share, is don't be afraid to start the process and give a figure and then recalibrate and get better and better. You've got to start somewhere, and giving some information backed up by some evidence is better than not giving any at all.
Absolutely. And then it's a learning curve, because you want to fine tune the tools that you have for your own data collection, and you want to learn what is the best method for you and for your operation to also gather this type of data. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you guys. So now last question to Chris. We're curious about how your work and the collaboration with your suppliers reflect internally in your company. So how does reporting verified granular data from the supplier strengthen trust and collaboration with internal teams?
So, we took the step of inviting our top 10 suppliers. Rachel was part of this to an open day. So them top 10 suppliers probably equate to 90% of our scope 3 carbon footprint. So it's understanding the challenges that they've got, and understanding directly what information we're after, and more importantly, walking them through the input of that data. So we were very clear on sharing Greenly data. We were very clear on sharing, and Rachel mentioned it earlier, the actual suppliers module within that. So we can see everything about that supplier. We can see how far they are on the greenhouse gas journey. We can see if they are SBTi certificated, but we can understand their challenges, some of the projects that they've got live. So as I said on the very first question, it was about working as a team, and I think that that strengthened the collaboration internally, because it's not become a us and them. It's not a case of me speaking to the procurement team or the commercial team at the other end and saying we need this information every month just to feed into Greenly. It's an appreciation of the suppliers and the customers the journey of that data, the work that goes into gather that data, validate that data, and then spit the data out at the other end. So, as I said, face-to-face with the entire supply chain is the way to go. Deal with this as one business, if you like. Myself and Rachel work very closely. We share wins, we share things that have not gone so well, and we also share that with our customers. I mean, there's a customer in particular that meets with myself and Rachel to try and get working as a circular entity rather than sort of a linear one. So I think your suppliers are key to motivating internal teams and to strengthening that trust, not only in people but in data.
Great. Rachel, do you have something to share with respect to this? I know that you also have collaborated with colleagues to gather all the data that you shared with us.
I think it's that example that Chris is saying about sort of it's supplier collaboration. So the fact that, Chris, I think at the very beginning sort of shared the Greenly scorecard, which when we were looking at selecting the platform, that was one of the things that really appealed to me. So the fact that we'd experienced that as a supplier to Clean and kind of have gone through that and sort of understood that process that they've gone through, it's like, well, that was always our ambition to want to do the same. And the other thing that's exciting for us as well is because obviously we've got this configured globally, this isn't just us going to our actual product manufacturers as well that we work with outside of our own manufacturing capability. It's also the fact that we can do that for our raw material suppliers. And again, that's a really other exciting area for us, that there's just not a huge amount of visibility of the actual impacts with regards to the actual investments that at a raw material level are happening. So that's the other thing. There's a lot more focus on traceability and supply chain, which for me, it sort of starts to open up another level of richness in terms of, for example, we might get a question from Clean that their customer wants to know something about the origination of where fibre and materials have come from. So it's like, ironically, excuse the pun, it's like a thread, and you literally just keep pulling at it. And it's like there's more and more and more data that you can sort of start to layer in and use to have richer and richer conversations to then sort of talk about the benefits of what that data is allowing us to do in terms of where those opportunities are. Even if we're thinking about the location of where materials are coming from, that's a whole other piece that we can then sort of start to kind of tell a story about the impacts. One example being as a result of some of the global conflict that's happening and the fact that goods technically would be taking longer to get delivered. That's entirely out of someone's operational control. But if we were being entirely transparent about communicating that to a customer, you could argue that the carbon footprint of getting those goods could be going up at the point where shipping routes over the last 2 years have been really impacted. So it allowed you to tell a story and explain and communicate, things that are outside of your control versus things that are, and where those opportunities are to collaborate and innovate together.
Absolutely. Yeah, transparency is key. Also telling the stories to all the partners in the supply chain. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, and then I think, so thanks both of you. So I think in the conversation we had so far, it was evident that for a successful collaboration, we need to begin from granular and primary data. So I think this question was designed actually for me to reply. So how does granular primary data allow businesses to move from measuring emissions to actionable decarbonization decisions? So of course, this type of data is crucial because it provides the specificity, the accuracy that Chris was mentioning several times, and the detail needed to pinpoint emission hotspots and to evaluate the effectiveness of targeting reduction strategy. So primary data is data that is gathered directly at the source. I'm thinking energy figures from utility meters, actual fuel consumption, or for example, supplier-specific manufacturing data, as Rachel was mentioning. And this is done instead of relying on industry averages or spend-based calculation. So when we have this type of granular and primary data, we can really trace emission down to a single product or a specific process, a specific supplier, a facility, or even a transportation route, as Rachel again was mentioning. So we can realistically assess the impact of any reduction strategy that impacts not only direct operation, but also has potential effects on the supply chain. So what we do at Greenly is that we encourage our customers to provide primary data to measure their emissions in the most accurate way. So this database becomes extremely valuable once the stakeholders in the supply chain can use our carbon accounting platform to retrieve supplier data to complete or improve their own carbon assessment. And this is the case of the two companies we have today in the webinar, because in the case of Vision Linens and Clean Linen, now Chris will be able to measure and monitor upstream emissions generated by Vision Linens, thanks to the data that Rachel has shared on our platform to calculate Vision's carbon footprint. So this makes Chris's assessment way more accurate and also insightful. And then I would also say that once this connection between supplier and buyer is established, the two companies can collaborate to plan forward and to put in place sustainability actions, both in the short and in the long term. We heard before about this daily conversation or discussing about these really operational small actions that the two companies can take. And since now the buyer has the visibility on the practices of the suppliers, they can ask them to be greener, to collaborate in a different way, to co-develop specific products or projects. And these projects can be aimed to mitigate both financial and physical risks over the next few years. The supplier can focus on operational efficiencies. They can model the advantages and the return of investment of major expenditures aimed, for example, as electrification or as developing on-site renewables. And we heard from Rachel again about the developing of or the installation of solar panels in the Bahrain facilities. So companies that are able to demonstrate this measurable reduction progress can increase their visibility and reliability on the market, which in turn can lead to new contracts or longer contracts, access to funding opportunities, but also position them as a low carbon leader in the market. Do you agree, guys? Do you think this is a good picture of how collaboration can help you?
Absolutely.
Great. Yes. So then I will move to the other slide. How educating stakeholders, internal team, suppliers, clients about data collection process, foster transparency, and realistic expectations. So this is again a question that was designed for me to reply. I can say that Greenly is trying to educate stakeholders about these topics that we discussed today with various tools. So on top of it all, we have the platform, and we already heard Chris talking about it and praising compliments to it. So I'm really happy to hear about that. So the platform aims to make data integration seamless and understandable to every contributor, even if they don't have a prior education in greenhouse gas emissions. So data collection is accompanied by guidance on the followed methodology and includes full transparency on the emission calculations. Then in addition to that, we have climate experts, such as myself, and the research and methodology team, which accompanies clients in order to ensure the framework compliance, but also flexibility with respect to any specific data requests. I know with Rachel, we had a few of them, and we needed to collect specific data from specific sources. And in some cases, we had gaps, so we had to provide proxies. So we're always there to help you fill these gaps and try to be as transparent, but also as comprehensive as we can when we are doing our carbon assessment. And then during the carbon assessment, but also after, we explain customers how to improve the accuracy of their report. So this tap into the learning curve that I was mentioning before. So we recommend the crucial emission sources where customers should prioritize getting their primary data. We encourage mapping suppliers to identify the hotspots and to establish potential collaborations. And then beyond measuring and reporting, we also provide trainings for our customers to engage their employees. We involve our customers to discuss relevant topics that support their reporting efforts. And we also organize these meetings between suppliers and buyers in order to foster their collaboration. So the more momentum we get from all these efforts, the more participation from different companies along the supply chain, the more opportunity we get to achieve transparent and comprehensive results. And in this way, we can really encourage decarbonization efforts that are achievable and that are going in many different directions at once. I see Rachel and nodding, so I'm happy that you agree with what I said. Nice. So now I want to just ask to both of you again if you have any takeaways that you would like to further share with our audience before we pass or we move on to our question and answer session.
Yeah, I think for me, the final takeaway is just to give you a little bit more context on something I mentioned earlier. And it was a bit of advice for me, and it was a bit of a guide from one of our customers. And that guide was, don't wait until you've got the perfect data. Submit what you've got. And I think that's something we need to embrace, because we'll never take that first step if we wait for the most accurate data. We thought we'd got accurate data at the end of 2024, but when you look at that, because we were trying to get a greenhouse gas report done pretty quickly, we hadn't we hadn't dug down far enough, and around about 80%, maybe 70% of our emissions was financial spend based. Flip side around to this year, and 80% of our emissions are activity based now. So, and as I said earlier, every door you open and you start looking, or every layer of the onion you keep peeling, you'll find another opportunity or another, I wouldn't say problem, but another challenge. But start now, and start with the simple stuff, scope 1, scope 2, and start building them relationships with your suppliers to understand how they operate, what they produce, how they produce it, and get that across to you. Start building a comprehensive portfolio of scope 3 categories.
Great.
I mean, I think I would say it's almost like there's loads of features within Greenly that you can leverage and kind of expand and benefit from over time. And I think that was one of the things for me around knowing that there's the LCA feature, there was the supplier scorecard, but actually it's only as we're heading into our 2025 reporting cycle that we're looking at the supplier scorecard, because the priority was to kind of baseline your data. So I think it's almost like that sliding scale of trust, sort of building on Chris's point. It's like where you're best focusing your efforts. There's almost like a pressure that you feel like you want to be singing and dancing from day one, but it's almost actually the other things that you can do sort of naturally evolve as your kind of measurement and data collection strategy evolves and changes as well. And then the more you're sort of getting teams on board as well, then that starts to drive more like confidence and ownership and understanding what the data means. Because I think that's the next evolution of it. Is it's the one thing getting the data in the system, it's then sort of taking the teams on that journey to sort of embed day to day what those figures look like. And I think one of the other nice little elements, so again, it's not a huge impact area for us, but it starts to bring staff along, is the staff travel module, where again, they're kind of filling in how they travel to work. They can sort of see that. It's that, for me, it's that difference between the sort of the micro level and the macro level around like, this is a huge, massive corporate greenhouse gas report, which can feel quite sort of analogous and ethereal, and it's hard to make sense of it. So the more you can extract data out that impacts people's day to day and where those opportunities are, I think that helps to really tie it in quite nicely. And to sort of Chris's point about the commercial benefits, when you can kind of explain, if this figure went down, it also saves you money. You kind of pushing an open door. So it just adds more influence as well. And I think for me, the presentation of this is like carbon intelligence to sort of support commercial decision making. I think it's the next step really about sort of you do all the work. It's then promoting it internally to get even more traction with it around those opportunity areas.
Absolutely.
And I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, Rachel's mentioned a couple there, but I'll just run through some of the modules they got within Greenly, and at the end I'll explain why I think they varied and they're very important. So as Rachel mentioned, you've got one for employees, so you can understand their commuting methods, so whether they're walking, coming in car, electric scooter, eating habits of employees, amount of time they spend in the office. All of these are creating carbon that in 2024 we'd only got probably about 5%. Now we're looking at 25%. There is accounting data that it can take. The big module is supplier data, as I mentioned before, so you can have a look at how mature your suppliers are with regard to their greenhouse gas journey, and you can actually see their scope 1, 2, and 3 data if they've actually got that far. Business travel, so you can track planes, trains, automobiles, HGV fleets, waste, so all your different types of waste. Another one we started tracking was IT inventory. So the purchase of IT equipment and then the ongoing carbon footprint and the disposal and the waste one. The one that really amazed me, and our marketing team loved this, was there's an actual digital ads module that sits there in the background, and you just connect, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, Google, marketing, whatever, LinkedIn, all of these, it sits there in the background and it actually monitors the carbon footprint of everything that you're putting out there digitally, which is great. That was a big win for us. End of life products is another one. Consultants and contractors, we don't tend to use a great deal of these, but it's something, again, when we talk about evolution of data, this is something Clean are looking to dig into a little bit more in 2026. And even if that's just one or two bits of data, it just adds validity to our figures. And then the big one, as I said, comes from your suppliers. It's products, raw material, packaging is the big one. Now, all of them can combine, and there's a couple of people that have been personally been involved in this on this call today. And when I joined Clean 2 years ago,
I lost him.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry.
Okay.
There's a glitch for today. So yeah, there's a couple of people on the call today that were involved with me when I first joined Clean 2 years ago. I'm not from the laundry industry. I'm from aviation, heavy engineering. The question was asked, what do our customers want? And our customer want to understand scope 1, 2, and 3 data. They want to understand what the CO2 footprint of Clean is on their operation. Now, without the Greenly modules, without the Greenly apps, we couldn't have been able to give them that accurately. And there would have been us potentially giving data that couldn't be backed up. So it's been a game changer for us. So we've now been able to satisfy customers' expectations, and something that we thought 18 months, 2 years ago was impossible to be able to do, given the varied amount of products we do, the amount of factories, the amount of different people, different cultures, different locations, different suppliers we couldn't do. All of them apps bring it into one nice, neat pile. And then the cherry on the cake, as Kate asked in one of the questions about how long does it take to do this, and it's once you get up and running, it takes very little time. But at the end of the year, there's a bit of time in a final check, a final validation that the data is correct. So is got the correct material? So is it cotton? Is it polycotton? And the beauty about the Greenly module is it actually highlights and puts those things in your face that don't look right or require a review. So it's almost like a second check that gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling that everything that you've done stacks up with the carbon experts at Greenly. So I thought it was worth just briefly overviewing some of their modules, because I think that's what makes Greenly is the varied modules. And I'm quite excited to see what you guys come up with in the future, because I'm sure there's again, as one person asked on the chat, scope 4 emissions. We don't hear a lot about them, but there's quite a few chats going on about them. It'd be interesting to see, will scope 4 become as crucial as scope 3, and what you guys are going up your sleeve to help facilitate the capture of them.
Yeah, you're right. I just want to mention, maybe I don't remember you mentioning the freight module as well. Maybe you didn't use it, but we also have that one. And now that freight, yes.
Yes, stand corrected. So yeah, carbon footprint of the manufacture of any HGV vehicle that comes in, and then obviously the ongoing cost and CO2 attributed to that. So I haven't found a module Greenly hasn't got yet, but I'm open to be challenged on that one.
That's great. And I think what you are mentioning now, it's all the way that we are implementing all of these modules is in order to facilitate data collection. We don't necessarily want customers to be scared by the emission reporting, in the sense that, oh, maybe companies, they don't have a sustainability expert that knows the GHG protocol and therefore already knows what type of data will generate emissions in which category of the GHG protocol. we don't ask you to be worried about that, because what you want customers to focus on is really your activities and your supply chain. And once that is clear and the data from each piece of this supply chain or of your activities can come and can be imported on our platform, we take care of calculating the emissions and allocating them, and then everything is clear for you as well.
I thought of one other small thing, but it's a good practical reminder about data collection is your naming, and I know, Jada, you're smart, the naming conventions of the sites in terms of you've got sort of like your entity level, maybe like your business unit level. Again, there's some really key things there if you're thinking about where the data is coming from, thinking about those data flows. So sometimes just simplistically understanding your organizational structure, which again, depending on, you know, who it is that's doing it, your finance team will be your best team to help with that around like, you know, where are those finance flows? Where is that information being gathered? Who reports and covers which sites? And then that will help you be consistent with the logistics of who's got access to the energy bill data, the water data, et cetera, because then that gives you the consistency of which sites sit where and how that data kind of flows and like moves together. Because once you're getting into anything larger than a sort of single entity, you want to be really clear around those naming conventions and how data is allocated to sites, because you've got considerations around things like cross-entity transfers and how sort of goods and things move between. So I think once you've got a structure that organizationally people are supportive of and understand, if you are sort of still tidying up your data, that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind. Just what you name, as in if it, you know, so you've had an acquisition and one site was called something else and it's called something else, you know, I think they're the sort of little things. It's just good housekeeping to remember stuff.
Absolutely. And also, if, you know, people involved in data collection change, you also want to be able to like retrace what has been done before you in an easy way, I'd say. Yeah. Okay. Is it okay if we move to the Q&A session, or yeah, Chris? Okay for you? Good.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there we go. Let me check in the chat if we have questions. Maybe we can move backward.
There was one that Kate had, the last chat comment in the chat was directed towards me, which was also about supplier engagement, based on obviously the positive example we've got between ourselves and Clean. Is I think it's very much, this for me is that it's that sustainable procurement bucket. So it's about, you know, the who and the how, really. You're trying to kind of have those conversations like up and down your supply chain. So for me, you know, what I've generally tended to find is sometimes actually connecting with other sort of sustainability and ESG leaders, or whoever is that kind of accountable person in the organization, as a kind of first port of call to have a conversation, because you're going to be happily having a conversation with somebody who's like committed and active in that space. And then, for example, for us already, highlighting to some of our suppliers as well, the benefits of why we're asking them questions and how we can use the data to almost like advocate and promote the suppliers. And this is that sort of knock-on effect. So I suppose it's, you know, Chris can highlight, oh, well, Vision have done this, that helps them tell a story about how they're buying. But then we have the same thing, that it's trying to get people to understand that multiple layers of that value chain, that when we're asking our suppliers to fill in an assessment, it's like, well, actually we can present you for potentially in a good light to our customer, that then it's a good light for their customer. So it's kind of highlighting the benefits of, by investing in this and telling your story, we can advocate and put more business your way fundamentally at the point where you can see your breakdown of where your spend is going. Then it's sort of highlighting the intention to work collaboratively and those opportunities, really. So if anything, I just think it focuses the mind more as to it's a mutually beneficial conversation. I think the only distinction I would say is, depending on what type of industry you're in, it's not always going to be as feasible to get direct competitors in a room together. So again, I think it's just more down to you knowing your industry and what approach is best. At the moment, for some of ours, obviously, we're not going to be necessarily directly bringing groups of people together, but in other areas that's a lot more easily done around things like, you know, logistics and transport and those sorts of things. So it's, I think, on a case by case basis, it's about what's best But I would say as well, I think whatever industry associations you have as well, in our example, like the TSA, which is the Textiles Services Association, are very good at kind of convening and bringing multiple people together. And I think those sorts of conversations can be really valuable to identify areas of opportunities across an industry. And if that's not happening for other kind of sort of participants sectors, that's always a good place to go, because they can act as a bit of an intermediary as well.
Yeah, and then we had a question in the question section. Chris, you have already replied directly in the chat, but maybe you want to share something else also in the conversation.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. I think as I've said throughout this this webinar, I mean, my experiences, don't wait. Absolutely engage. Give data that you've got, but obviously explain where you think there are potential gaps. You've got to start somewhere. We started somewhere, and 2025 is completely different from 2024's. And again, the other beauty of the Greenly modules is it will actually show you at the end of the year what's gone up, what's gone down, and you can actually still. So this year we're going to be reporting more greenhouse gas for clean than we did in 2024, but you can actually see what proportion you didn't equate or you didn't consider in the previous year. So yes, your greenhouse gas has gone up, but you've got that finite data that sits below it to explain that you're getting more and more mature and you're identifying more and more categories.
Absolutely. And then as you mentioned, so first of all, we are making sure that the methodology is still applied in the correct way. We can support using proxies when it's relevant to do that, and we ensure that the methodology is followed in the correct way. So yeah, definitely. And it's also worth starting from somewhere and learning while doing, let's say. Yeah.
And then sort of add maybe to Jonathan's point around sort of, if you can share what you've got as well. I think the other thing that's beneficial for when you're trying to advocate internally for why maybe you need to get more support for developing more data collection and gathering is like you say, at the point where customers are asking for A, B, and C, then actually it's sort of highlighting that this is a new area for us to kind of work on and gathering our data, but what your time frames are, what your commitments are. In that whole spirit of transparency, I think anyone who's on this journey now recognizes it's a constant ongoing battle. So if you're chatting to the right people, there is a degree of understanding and kind of empathy. As long as you're kind of showing you're making progress, you're highlighting where you've made improvements, and you've still got these challenges. I think everyone's got different challenges, but in some ways it also feels quite cathartic that at least if you're chatting to the right person, hopefully that helps. And if there is pressure, then at least it's trying to establish where that's coming from. And again, just sort of, if you are struggling, then I think at that point, at least if it's coming from a customer, then there should be a lot more receptivity to helping explain, because like I said, the landscape's evolving all the time around different data requests and asks. And I think that's the other thing that gets quite complicated, is trying to sort of bucket the different types of data that your customers are asking for, and then sort of help people know where and how to get that and what it means. I think that can sometimes be the other challenge, is people just are getting hit with so many questions. It's trying to just establish where they originate from in terms of what data can give you what answers.
Absolutely. So explaining the advantages, and you said transparency is the key in all this process. Yeah. So we are right on time, I think. So let's reach the end of our webinar. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. And I appreciate you spending time with us and with Rachel and Chris, the sustainability champions from Vision Linens and Clean Linen. Let's recap what we just discussed today. So there are 3 points, as you can see in the slide. First one, the power of primary data. So primary data is the foundation, because it moves the conversation from general compliance to precision investment. It shows us exactly where the emissions are and what specific processes or suppliers or operation needs attention. Second point, the necessity of collaboration. As you may have understood and heard today, decarbonization is a team effort. So this strategic collaboration between Visions and Clean demonstrates that sharing the data builds trust. It unlocks mutual and long-term value rather than just cutting costs. And the third point, as Rachel was just mentioning, transparency drives action. So Building a transparent database is critical. It turns siloed sustainability reports into actionable integrated planning tools that allow suppliers and buyers to prioritize and track progress over time. So Rachel and Chris, thanks again for your participation and for your commitment to
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for the audience for being with us. If you want to discuss more, please reach out to Greenly at any time. Bye-bye, and thank you.